In an earlier video, I ranted about some things I would like to see in the campaign mode for my ideal Total War game. This is part 2 of that video where we're going to go on to talk about battle features. You might want to go back and watch the first one if you haven't already, links around the place, etc. Now with these ones, I suspect you're more likely to disagree because these ones for battles are a little bit more geared towards my personal tastes. I don't know if they would make the game objectively better or that everyone would think they're better. So at the very least, right now, here are the top 10 features I would personally like to see in Total War battles. Number 1. Cavalry charges shocking morale before impact. This is a historically inspired change. It's a matter of historical debate whether cavalry were really used to engage in combat as portrayed in Total War, but I think it's generally accepted that they didn't because it was too difficult. Firstly is the difficulty of training horses to ram into solid masses, then the difficulty of training riders not to fall off when the horse crashed into things, and thirdly, and the most important one for my point here, of training infantry to stand still and let cavalry ride into them. Generally, if a unit was about to receive a cavalry charge, it would turn around and scatter, and that is why cavalry was deadly. They would kill the scattered unit and chase them off the battlefield entirely so they could never rejoin the formation. If you're an infantryman, seeing a cavalryman charge towards you means pretty much certain death if they hit you. The morale shock is huge, and most historical troops would just rout if cavalry threatened to charge, unless they were equipped and trained to repel cavalry such as pikemen or line infantry in a square formation. I would like to see this mechanic in Total War. Cav should be unwieldy and hard to maneuver once charging, so you really just commit them to a charge and let them do it, unable to give orders once they are charging for a short time at least. Enemy units in the path of the charge would receive a large morale shock that would rout even a full-strength unit unless it's an anti-cav one or has sufficient training. After all, a trained unit knows that just standing really close together is enough to stop a cavalry charge, as the horses will probably try to go around you instead, especially if you have something pointy to shoo them away with. Number 2. Increased importance of terrain / new terrains. Terrain is already pretty important in battle, but I want it to be more so. Have you ever actually tried running up a steep hill? Have you tried doing it with full armour? It's pretty hard, and I always thought it looked too easy in Total War. Moving uphill is a very slow and laborious affair, and if you're a heavy unit, you'll get exhausted even walking up a hill, especially if you're trying to deflect missiles at the same time. Conversely, you can run or even walk very, very fast downhill. Maybe I'm just judging it wrong, but in Total War I don't think the difference a slope makes is big enough to the speed that units move at. Also, this may exist already, but the charge bonus should certainly be affected by the slope, so that running downhill into an enemy formation blasts their line apart and perhaps even kills your own men, while charging uphill does absolutely nothing and leaves the men at the front fighting a losing battle even against vastly inferior troops. This would likely be impossible to balance for multiplayer, as hills would become too important. But realistically, hills were important, so maybe in single player at least they could be a bigger deal. Another terrain feature I'd like to see is terrain degrade with use or in certain conditions. If it's raining on soft ground, once the first couple of ranks have walked through an area, the ones behind will be slowed a lot, and this was a real problem for generals keeping their formation together. Fighting in the rain or right after it was a decision made only when you think the hindrance to the enemy is more important than the hindrance to you. Rain battles should be static, slow affairs, especially if artillery or heavy units are involved. I'll mention weather more in the next feature, so I'll leave this as it is for now. Another terrain type I'd be interested in would be dense forest, the sort of forest or woods that you would see in real life, where the trees, bushes and undergrowth are everywhere, meaning that cavalry absolutely cannot run. This would be a tactical area on the battlefield, as infantry would move faster than horses, allowing skirmishers to hide from cav charges there or even repel them. The dense forests would be great for ambushes too, much easier to hide forces if a little slower to charge out. You might even see battles in forests entirely where most of the terrain is like this, making for tense battles where most units can't see each other, and open areas like roads are extra important. It would be a new kind of battle, probably a very annoying one, but that's your problem for trying to sneak your army into enemy lands through a forest. Number 3. Increased weather importance. I kind of already mentioned this, talking about how rain should slow everything down a lot, as should snow, but I would like to use the feature where you pick the day of battle to get the weather you need with a little something extra. Every day you wait, the enemy has the option to suddenly attack you if the weather favours them. So if you're attacking with an army full of cannons or elephants and you wait on a rainy day, the enemy might force a battle by attacking you, making you the defender in the battle, but stopping you from properly deploying your heavy units, possibly turning things in the enemy's favour. Or, every day you wait might give the enemy time to entrench their position, increasing the number of defensive objects they could use in the battle, which I'll also touch on in a later point. Or, they could even just move while you're waiting, making the battle now take place on the next battlefield over. So if you start a battle and the enemy has bad terrain, waiting for better weather will likely allow them to move back, shifting the battlefield to a terrain they'll do better on. Most of these options just add more things to consider when you're making an attack, especially against an army of equal powers to yours. These little factors can make or break your forces. It's more historical too, since half the challenge of commanding a real army is considering these little factors. Getting these sorts of things right was the sign of a great commander. The textbook might say to wait for dry weather, but your keen eye spots a chance for a sudden victory if you attack right away, so it's time for a daring attack that will go down in history and take your enemy, presumably reading from the same textbook, by surprise. Oh, and one more possible little trick. Factions with impetuous armies like a Germanic tribe might lose integrity if you wait for a fight. That could be cool. Number 4. Guard mode. Don't really need to say much more about that, but I've got some more to say, talking more about different stances you could assign to your units, as well as guard mode, which is basically just telling your units to fight in position, and a regular mode, which means stick to the first target you engage until you die or get told otherwise. I would like other strategies to be available. One I often wish for is giving ground or a fighting retreat. Basically, the unit fights as normal but continually shuffles backwards, drawing the enemy units forwards if they themselves aren't in guard mode. This would be absolutely great for controlling your enemy in battle, and drawing them to locations where you gain a tactical advantage, especially against units that are unlikely to use guard mode like warbands. Another strategy could be a volley and charge mode, specifically thinking about gunpowder line infantry here, where if you give them the order to melee attack an enemy unit, they will first reload their weapons, then charge to point blank range, stop, fire a single volley with devastating effect, then charge into melee, which is basically what the redcoats used to do a lot. You can't do this now with micromanagement and it's really effective, but making it a toggleable behaviour would make life easier. It isn't that different to the concept of throwing a volley of javelins before a charge anyway, so I'm sure that one would be quite easy to set up. Here's another, a variant on guard mode which is called something like hold ground, where the unit will basically not attempt to attack units even while being engaged, focus entirely on defense and shifting their stats accordingly. It's basically what a hoplite phalanx does in Rome 2, but I'd like to see other units have similar abilities, as any vaguely trained unit could plausibly just stand there and try to stay alive while you enact a strategy elsewhere. Attacking in melee is a tiring and dangerous thing to do, while defending is generally less so for anyone. Another one, breakthrough, aka the opposite of my fighting retreat idea. This is a more complex one designed to just separate an enemy line. The men on the edge of a unit would fight statically and defensively, just staying alive and keeping the enemy distracted, like with the whole ground idea. But in the centre, the men would have the opposite stat changes, having higher attack and lower defence, constantly moving forwards, trying to drive through the middle of the enemy unit. You would take plenty of losses doing this, but you'd open up a strip of ground that could be wide enough to move another unit through the enemy line entirely, ready for a rear attack that would make it all worthwhile. It might also be useful for a unit that is surrounded, for it to create a way for itself to escape. These strategies or modes might only be available to especially trained units, and of course, if my idea of custom units from the last video is used, I might be able to order my unit of levy spears especially to have training in doing a fighting retreat, but at the expense of a longer training time. Number 5. Battlefield baggage trains. Armies tended to walk around with a lot of spare stuff to hand, which is why in Total War I always hate running out of ammunition, especially in a settlement defense. Armies know when a battle is about to take place and have plenty of time to stockpile arrows, shots, spears and gunpowder ready for the big day. They would have more than a man could carry, so would leave a lot of it behind the lines in their baggage train. What I want to see is the option to bring said baggage train onto the battlefield to act as a point where ammunition can be resupplied, fatigue is restored faster, and perhaps even acting as a rally point for routing troops to stop and return to the fight. Perhaps the unit would be garrisoned into the train, manning whatever defences it has while their ammo and energy restores. Based on the size of the train, there would be a limit to how many units can do this at once. Since this point is so important, it also needs to be dangerous to deploy it, giving an enemy a chance to destroy your supplies even if you do go on to win the battle, or steal them and use them against you. But if your enemy has a baggage train on the field, you could do the same to them. I envision this being particularly useful in a siege attack, where your men can go back and forth to resupply, then continue bombarding the defenders with projectiles. But if an enemy raid gets out and destroys it, your men might run out of supplies before the siege is over. Or you could even sally out from a siege just to capture an enemy baggage train, then end the battle, increasing the amount of time your siege can hold out and suddenly forcing the enemy to take attrition, allowing you to beat a superior force. An alternative way to do this might be to have your men leave the battlefield and then return to represent them going back to the camp, but I prefer the idea of having a high value target on the field if the general is feeling so bold. Number 6. More static defences. In Rome 2, you could upgrade your commanders to let them build static defences on battlefields before a fight, in theory giving you an advantage, especially as the defender. But it was all rather lackluster. Great, I can build 20 metres of wooden palisade. What about the other 300 metres of my line? I think that when it comes to having an army be entrenched, you should have many pieces of construction equipment available to make a really interesting defensive position. The Romans, of course, were famous for whipping up whole forts in a couple of hours. Realistically, you would have at least a day's notice once the battlefield was chosen before any fighting started, just because of the logistics of getting an attack going in most cases. Having loads of walls, loads of traps, loads of anti-cavalry devices would make attacking more of a puzzle, and defending more safe. It would incentivise sudden attacks to catch armies while they're busy, i.e. not in a regular campaign stance. It would incentivise not waiting for weather to change, since the enemy will get time to make these upgrades if you give them a night to prepare. There is a chance that this might end up being really annoying in practice because it would slow down the pace of the battles, but I'd at least be interested in seeing an attempt at this. Number 7. Non-instant reinforcements. Generally, reinforcement armies arrive on the battlefield before the battle takes place, meaning you usually just add them to your main force and then continue as normal. I think a more interesting arrangement would be to only have this happen if the army was literally right next to yours on the map. If it was further away but still within reinforcement range, you would have to wait a certain amount of time on the battlefield before they arrive. So it might be between 30 seconds and 20 minutes of battle from minimum to maximum possible distance away. This could make a huge difference, especially if there are some enemy reinforcements that are quite powerful but are far away, allowing you to win the battle before they arrived, which could either then force you to start a new battle with the reinforcements on the next battlefield over, or to just rout the reinforcements. But of course, if you waited before your attack, such as waiting for the weather, then all involved reinforcements could probably show up. So if you have reinforcements but the enemy doesn't, then they will probably be very tempted to attack you on the first day regardless of weather, so that they can try and decide the battle before the rest of your men arrive. In all, the differences in timing could make battles where armies are dependent on reinforcements a lot more tense, leading to epic moments where your reinforcements arrive just as you're losing hope. Number 8. Increased consequences for losing best troops. This is a little change, it could probably even be modded in. If you're a soldier in an army, you probably know who your best troops are, which companies have a reputation for being strong. I'd like to see a battlefield effect where seeing an elite unit routing gives a morale shock, similar to seeing the general routing. For the regular man, seeing the best trained and equipped men in your army flee in fear would be a real downer, that's for sure. Right now, elite units often increase the morale of allies they are near, but I don't think their defeat has an especially negative effect on their morale either, which it really should. My peasant slinger isn't going to wait around and see what happens to them after the sacred band hoplites have rushed away in panic. Of course, on the flip side, it could be that when influential units rally from the rout and reform, it might increase the probability of nearby units doing the same, wishing to follow their respected example. This point is basically just making special units have the same effect on morale as generals do, keeping the positive ones they already have but adding in the potential negative ones when things go wrong. It gives a nice incentive to try and plan to defeat the elite units, as normally your best strategy would be to just try and avoid the elite units and defeat the others to reduce their morale via army losses. This gives you an alternative approach, cutting off the head of the army to destroy the morale of the rest. A tactic that would be great when outnumbered so much that defeating the main body of their troops isn't likely. Plus, I think it would be quite historical too. For example, I seem to remember it was the loss of a few elite forces that triggered the rout of the French at Waterloo, with most of their army still intact. I might be wrong about that, but it definitely seems like it would be the realistic option anyway, given human psychology. Number 9. Better use of wounded men. Currently, you'll see wounded men on the battlefield from time to time, writhing about among the dead while the living soldiers ignore them and clip through them. I don't like it. Here's what I propose. Wounded men will attempt to leave the battlefield or get to your baggage train if you have one, which of course would be easier and increase their chance of survival. The presence of wounded men streaming back from fighting would be a target for cavalry, and something you'd have to protect to increase the number of men replenished into your army in the turns after the battle if my ideas about wounding from the campaign video are implemented. It would further increase the value of the baggage train as a place for your wounded men to gather and stabilise, and increase its value as a target, because destroying the baggage train would kill all of the wounded men and stop the army from getting any replenishment after the battle. Perhaps even a small portion of the wounded men would attempt to rejoin their unit later in the battle if their wounds could be allayed with minor treatment by the crew of the baggage train. That might be more practical if you sent the unit back to rest there and then the wounded men from that unit or identical units joined it. One idea I'd like to see regarding the crews from the train would be having members go out and try to pick up wounded men who can't walk and bring them back. This would probably need careful programming to make sure they don't put themselves in massive danger while doing this. The baggage train might even have a limbered and unlimbered state, able to move while limbered but needing more crew to control it. So when stationary and unlimbered, it frees up crew to help the wounded more, but trades off the benefit of not being able to follow the flow of battle and stay close to units that need more ammo or a chance to rest. If you don't have a baggage train, the general could designate a rally point on good terrain on the field somewhere where wounded men would gather along with troops that return from routing. Either this or the wounded would just leave the field entirely, keeping them safe but removing the chance they'll return to the battle while it's still going. Number 10. Careful use of animations. This is one I think a good number of people have thoughts on. In the recent Total War, the use of pre-made fight animations, some of which are quite long, occasionally lead to some weird stuff going on. This was most obvious in Shogun 2, where men would duel one-on-one while surrounded by uninterested soldiers, just because the way the animations worked meant interactions between one soldier and others couldn't happen. The main issue here isn't a gameplay one, but it's one of immersion and the general appearance. It seems to be a trade-off that when the animations become more action-packed and detailed, the context of those animations becomes more weird, especially as more of the animations are audacious fighting techniques suited to single combat rather than battlefield combat. It makes sense, since in order to mocap it they probably only had 2 people fighting, but I think it would make more sense and give a more satisfying battlefield view if they mocapped these animations while surrounded by other people in a limited amount of space. Really, you couldn't move forward or back very much, and any action you do to drop your guard while attacking could lead to an adjacent soldier killing you. If you move your shield to the side while attacking, the man to the right of your target is just going to stab you. We need stuff like this to happen in the animations. However, the cool one-on-one fights should remain, but perhaps be programmed only to happen in open combat, where the combatants can move around and are unlikely to be interrupted, i.e. situations where a very aggressive and flowing fight might plausibly happen. It could also vary by faction, with your Greek heavy infantry being very defensive and only killing enemies with quick jabs around their shield, and crazed barbarians willing to barrel their way into the line, almost suddenly dying but maybe taking one or more of their foes with them. Animations, although not really important to the gameplay, are part of the game and the spectacle. And the spectacle is one of the key selling points of the series, hence why the trailers are just machinimas of the animations rather than bragging about how well balanced the mechanics are. It's probably very expensive to get this right, but right now battles are just weird to watch when you get too close. So that's about it for battles, and that's about it for my list of ideas for Total War. Again, I'm sure there were some more ideas I had. In fact, there's definitely a few, but we're going to stop for now. We'll do another ideas video in the future if there's enough ideas to justify it. So right now, it's your chance to hit the comments section, just like in the previous video, and tell me if there are any ideas you liked, any you hated, and give your own interpretations, your own fresh ideas. And anyone reading the comments, do remember to upvote any ideas you think sound good, so other people can see them as well and think about them. Now, I'm assuming that the creative directors at CA are watching this, so if you guys like the sound of these ideas, I'm sure you've had some of them yourself at one point or another, but anyway, if you like the sound of them, feel free to put them into your next Total War game. I'd very much enjoy it. And although if you do, my only demand is that you call the game Total War Devon. I'm sure it wouldn't be that hard. You can push that through marketing. So thanks everyone for listening to me rant. I'm sure that once I gather up some more ideas, I could dish out some more. In the meantime, I'll have more Total War narratives coming out very soon, so if you're new to this channel, do take a look, maybe even subscribe, you might like them. That's all from me, have a good rest of day.